Start? Carolyn?
Hello, I'm Carolyn Jew Kuhn. I was formerly Carolyn Jew. My Chinese name is Zhao Suikin. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and I am very proud to say that I am the great-granddaughter of Chin Su, one of the pioneers of Colorado, and I am the fourth generation in this Chin family.
And could you talk about your parents? The third generation.
Yes, third generation. My father was also born in the United States in San Francisco, but my mother was born in Denver, Colorado. She is of the third generation, and her father, William Chin, was the mayor of Chinatown in Denver, Colorado, and the father of the mayor of Chinatown was Chin Su. So my mother had an older sister named Frances, and she married Herbert, and her name became Frances Wong. There was my mother, Wawa Si Jew. Then there was my uncle, William Chin, followed by my auntie, who is here today, Hazel Hong, and there was also my other uncle, Edward Chin. And then there was a set of twins, and that was Helen and Henry. And I'm sorry to say Henry passed away in his teen years, but Auntie Helen is still here and lives in San Francisco along with my Aunt Hazel Hong. I have a half-sister, Jean, and she lives in Pinole, California. And I have my sister, Linda Susan Jew, who was born in Denver. And we both now live in Parker, Colorado. And down the road, I did get married and married a man by the name of Richard Lawrence Kuhn. And we adopted a little girl from the Anhui province in a little town called Hefei. And her name is Jenna Lin Kuhn. And her Chinese name is Fong Yun Ching. So this is a quick summary of my family.
I'd like to know something about the work that your parents did in Denver. What kind of business they did? What was their livelihood?
I'll speak about my mother, who I love and miss a lot. She passed away 3 years ago, and she worked very hard in her young years as a waitress, and she was an educated woman. The family never showed any bias towards male or female, and so my oldest Auntie Frances got to go to Colorado Women's College, and my mother also did go to Colorado Women's College, but thereafter they ran out of money and the boys could not go to college. The boys, William and Edward, were recruited into and fought in World War II. William was part of the Flying Tigers, and Edward was in the Army, and he was a ground troop, landed in Normandy and did some of the terrible fighting in Italy. My mother, however, was at home with my wonderful grandmother, Daisy, and she worked as a waitress, because at the time there was not too much welcoming of the Chinese people. And so jobs were hard to find. And my mother did all the silver service and worked very, very hard as a waitress. Eventually, she did go to work in a munitions factory along with my auntie Hazel Hong, and they examined bullets and rolled those bullets in their hands to look for defective bullets that were used in World War II. She continued to work as a waitress, and one of the very appreciative patrons by the name of Winter was his last name, owned the Winter Weiss Corporation. And Winter Weiss needed somebody to help him at his company, and learned that Mom was an educated woman, gave her a job as a secretary. She worked as a secretary and did very well there, and very much became friends with the Winter Weiss family, and they have been wonderful to us up until time that she passed away. So I hope I answered questions about
Yes.
the family.
Well, you mentioned your grandmother, Daisy.
Yes,
So she would be, she's your mother's mother.
yes.
So is she the daughter of Chin?
No, she married the son of Chin Lin Su. She was married to William Chin. William Chin was the son of Chin Lin Su. And my grandmother came through, let's see, what was it? Angel Island. They were not allowed to come directly into the United States because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so she was interned at Angel Island for several years until finally she was allowed to join Willie Chin, who by then was in Denver, Colorado. And my grandmother was a wonderful person. When my father passed away, I was 5, Linda was 6. My Uncle Edward Chin, took us into his home because he never married, and he and my grandmother, Daisy Chin, all lived together in a generational home. We were so lucky because we got to know our grandmother. She spoke Cantonese to us, and she learned English a little along the way. She watched all the old black and white television movies, and she was the best grandmother. We had a grandmother who was as good as her, and we called her by her nickname, Goody. So every summer, my Uncle Ed and my grandmother welcomed the family from San Francisco, and we got very close to my Auntie Helen and Auntie Hazel and Auntie Frances and her children and all of the children of Auntie Hazel and Auntie Helen. And it was and continues to be a very close family. My grandmother, Daisy Chin, Daisy Yun Chin, Chin is the name is adapted to my daughter's Chinese name, Fong Yun Ching. And so I have still a dog that she autographed for me. She learned how to write her name in English, and I still have that to this day. She was a wonderful person.
Did she talk about her father-in-law? Do you know some of the history of Chin Lin Su?
No, she did not. She spent a lot of time protecting us from getting spanked. My sister and I were a little bit rowdy, and my mother always used to think that we needed some discipline. So my grandmother spent a lot of time telling my mother that we were good girls and that we should not be spanked. So no, she did not share a lot of information about Chinlin Su. And it was only in the later years when we learned about the historical importance of Chinlin Su that it became apparent we needed to know a lot about our great-grandfather.
So how did you find out more about him, and can you tell us what you know about him?
Well, I have been on this quest for a very long time, and of course the family is always the best and the most informed. So my Uncle Ed, my Uncle Bill, Auntie Hazel, Auntie Helen, and sometimes Auntie Frances were able to share some pieces of history about him. But the most information that I gathered was going to the Denver Public Library since 2008, because it becomes very important as you get older. History is important, and I would like for my daughter to know and understand what and how the pioneers made their lives and my life a lot easier, a lot better because of their hard work. So it's been since that time that I have been going to the Denver Public Library, and I got to be friends with the historian in the history library down in Denver. And I used to look at the microfiche, at all of those, print them off, what happened. I read them. A lot of the information was erroneous. It was very disturbing to see that my grandfather, William Chin, was not acknowledged as the mayor of Chinatown. And even worse, the information on Chinlin Su was very sparing and sometimes inaccurate. So for years, my mother, Wawa Chin Jew, and I went to the operas up at Central City. We saw and sat in the house, the opera house, where Chinlin Su had a chair dedicated along with several other pioneers. His chair is right next to Bill Cody, William Cody, and that chair was dedicated by the McFarland family, a preeminent family in Denver. So that even made me more interested, continued to look at the history. Then Colorado in 1876, it was the centennial for Colorado in 1976. And so in honor of the pioneers, they created stained glass windows of the Coloradoans who made an impact. Chinlin Su was one of them. Linda Jew and I were honored to make a presentation about Chinlin Su's stained glass window. So we went to the state capitol on the 3rd floor, and in 1977 we spoke about our family, and we knew that that stained glass was of large importance. When they built the convention center in Denver, Colorado, the mosaics surrounding the convention center all had photographs of the pioneers, of which one was Chinlin Su. So we have been looking and exploring and asking. And then finally, we have had interviews with the wonderful William Way, who is married to Susan Way, Dr. William and Dr. Susan Way of the University of Colorado. They are history teachers. William Wei has acknowledged and remembered that the Chinese people were an important part of building Colorado, and it was disturbing to him to know that the Chinese people were not at all recognized. So he came, he spoke to my mother and to my uncle and to my sister, and had several articles published in the Denver Post and in the Rocky Mountain News about the absence of acknowledgement for the Chinese people who built Colorado. Then, about almost less than a year ago, Jeff Hahn from the World Journal, he is a renowned journalist, a reporter, who wrote an email and said, Dr. William Wei has introduced me to your family, and I would like to interview you about Chinlin Su and your family, because the people of China would like to know what it is that the Chinese people did here and why it is that they are important in Colorado. And thereupon, the article over several weeks was put together and compiled, and the World Journal was then published in China, read by the premier in China, published in New York and all the major Chinatowns, in Chicago and Los Angeles and San Francisco, none in Denver. So my cousin Terry Hong sent articles in, and my husband's cousin sent the newspaper World Journal in from New York. We had the journal, but it was not translated, and so we wondered what it said, whereupon we invited Dr. Wei down to dinner at my house, and he and Susan then put a rough translation together of everything. William Wei was wonderful in providing the translation. However, I supplied the pictures of our family because I thought it was important, not only just the picture of Chinlin Su and the next generation, Willie Chin, and then the next generation, the children, the third generation, but the fourth generation. So we didn't have translation of the captions, and so my husband and I often go to a Chinese restaurant up in Conifer, Colorado. And in Conifer, Colorado, an Italian young man who studies and speaks Mandarin translated the captions for me, and therein lies the entire translation, which was sent and shared over the internet with my family and the people from Stanford.
I just wanted to ask about Chinlin Su and the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. Do you have information, or have you done research on his role in?
Oh, absolutely. Chinlin Su was a significant player in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad because he was tall in stature, over 6 feet tall, spoke perfect English. He was an educated man and not of the coolie genre. He was perfect to recruit and to lead the people in California to work in Colorado on the Transcontinental Railroad. He was the foreman. There was some doubt about the ability of the Chinese to do a good job on the Transcontinental Railroad, but we see that the Chinese got the hardest job in building the railroad over the mountain passes and over the hilly areas we see pictures of the Chinese people having to be lowered in baskets to blast away the rock and to lay the rails in which the railroad would pass. Chinlin Su made sure that this was completed, and I think at a promontory point in which the railroad met from the west and the east, the job had been completed. The ironic thing is, the Chinese people were not acknowledged even at that time. They were not invited to the final celebration of the finishing of the Transcontinental Railroad. And based on that, it was a little bit disturbing to know and understand that while this man had done a wonderful job, the Chinese people were summarily dismissed. They were considered not very useful anymore. The other people stayed around Colorado. There was a Chinatown, but Chinatown was not in the best area. It now is a very in place to be. Chinatown is now where the Coors Field baseball field is, and at the time they grew up there, it was near the railroad. But the discrimination was tough, and the jobs were hard to find. But the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, even to this day, is still not acknowledged. And there are articles from Dr. William Way, who brought that up, wrote books, wrote articles, and I have made it somewhat of a mission on my own to go to the History Colorado Museum. History Colorado Museum is about Colorado and pioneers. What I saw was that there was a lot of information about the Japanese internment, Camp Amachi, and the Japanese people. There was minimal information about the Chinese people and the building of the railroad. So I joined up at History Colorado, and I got a comment card. The comment card was a long-winded, what my daughter calls a dissertation, asking, where is the display? Why are the Chinese not represented? I want to share some information. I would like Colorado to acknowledge the work and the Chinese people who made Colorado and this nation great. And that was all partially the work of Chinlin Su, my great-grandfather, and the work of the Chinese people in Colorado.
Does your family oral history or tradition ever talk about the famous 10 miles a day, 10 miles in one day of track that were laid? Was Chinlin Su the foreman for that project?
It wasn't discussed a lot. The literature does say, however, that the rules were they needed to lay 10 miles a day. The Polish and Irish people used to laugh at the Chinese people because they looked different. They wore queues, they wore clothing, they were small in stature. But once the hiring Caucasians saw how hard the Chinese worked, it was very apparent that the Chinese people were going to make the building of the railroad 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day, work and a success.
And I heard that your grandfather, William Chin, was sent by his father back to China at one point to learn more about China. Could you talk about that a little bit?
My aunties probably know a little bit more, but we know that tradition in our family is very important. And it was important for Chinlin Su to make sure that his sons, William Chin, my grandfather, know about Chinese tradition, go back, learn, write. So he did. He went back and he learned, and he was also a very smart and educated man. And when he came back to Colorado, then he was bilingual and also, like Chinlin-Su, very much a leader. And he was, in fact, the mayor of Chinatown, and a handsome man and a good man.
Did you know him?
Never got to meet him. He was kicked in the back by a mule, and it damaged his kidneys. Well, we were not lucky enough to ever meet him face to face, but we have heard everything good about him. He was, I think, buried at the old cemetery at Riverside Cemetery in Colorado, and while it was not a very beautiful spot, it was still a place of honor, and he is buried there with his wife, Daisy Chin. So the mayor of Chinatown also had a great impact, and my aunties probably could tell you more about this man.
And do you know when Chinlin-Su's bones were sent back to China? I gather he was buried in Denver, but then his bones were later returned to China.
I don't have the date, but he was buried in Riverside, and then tradition would say that he needs to go back to the homeland. And so they had a friend who helped to unearth his remains and took him back to China. And I don't have the date, but maybe my sister has.
Do you know the village? Do you know the village that your great-grandfather came from?
You know, I, again, just know that our family is from Canton, and my mother always used to say we were Guangdong people at Ho-Mei-Chun, the end of the river. So they had apparently a nice place to live there, and that's how my great-grandfather Chinlin-Su was more of an educated man than the average Chinese.
Do you know if he was from the Toisan district?
And I don't know that.
The dialect, I was just wondering.
Yeah, I sure don't know that, sorry.
Have you ever heard someone mention a town called Dungun?
Dungun?
Is that, because
Dungun.
one of the articles mentioned that is where he was from, is that correct?
Oh, boy, and I'm so glad my Auntie Hazel is here,
Yeah, great.
because she would know much about Donggun, and it is something that we know is part of Canton. So I wish I was more educated on that aspect.
Did any members of your family go back to the village or go to the village to see what your ancestral village looked like?
We have not. We are up to generation number 6, and we have become very Americanized, and we have not, while we have gone back to China to walk the Great Wall and have gone to Shanghai and Canton, looking up anybody related or in the family has not been something that we have done.
Well, and you mentioned that the Chinatown does it still exist, the Chinatown?
Oh, no. There was much discrimination. The Chinese people, as I mentioned, were not welcome, and jobs were not forthcoming. So the Chinese people always look after family, and the important thing in Chinese family is education. As in our family, college was always what the Chinese parents worked to get their children through. So the children went to college, and even the third generation people who were the granddaughters of Chinlin-Su moved away to California, and there were more Chinese people there. So today, very few of the Chinese people live in Colorado, And Chinatown disappeared. It's a shame. Japantown is still there, but Chinatown is not. And it would have been a very interesting place to have.
Did you hear about the anti-Chinese riot in Denver? And
We have heard of it through the newspaper, and my mother has always warned us to be careful. And we have a place in Colorado called Castle Rock. Unfortunately, Castle Rock is a high spot in Colorado, and it is a place in which the people who did not care for the Chinese, what do you call those people that wear the white hoods, the KKK clan, would pick on people of the Chinese race, and several were hung in Castle Rock. So it's a hard thing to talk about. The people were not welcome, they were not liked, and the discrimination was so bad, even the third generation. My Uncle Ed, who fought in World War II, tried to come back from the war, buy a home in East Denver, and was not allowed to do that. The realtor, an Italian man, said, "Ed, I'll buy the land for you, and then you can buy it back from me." So Park Hill was an area which was exclusively white, and my Uncle Ed bought back that piece of land and built a house. And while a lot of the Asians were not welcome, there were a lot of people who made Colorado their home. And regardless of whether people tried to say that the Chinese people were taking jobs or running the other people out of the benefits of their family, our family has survived and endured. And I'm proud to say my sister Linda and I and one other cousin, William Edward Chin, still live in Colorado. So there's still evidence of racism because of Chin and Sue and the mayor of Chinatown, William Chin, and because of the children of William Chin. Our lives were easier and better. And true to word, my sister and I and most all of the fourth generation cousins went to college and did well. So we survived, and we needed to go on and make sure that the rest of the people knew the story of the Chinese and needed to make sure that the following generations, even though we are Americans, need to know and understand the importance of the Chinese pioneers who built Colorado.
One more quick. William Chin, who was your grandfather, was in the Flying Tigers. Is that or
William Chin was the son
he was the son
of the mayor of Chinatown. So William Sr. was the mayor of Chinatown. William Chin, the next one, was in the Flying Tigers. And then the third William Chin, William Edward Chin, the son of the Flying Tiger, lives in Colorado right now. So we have a fourth generation still in Colorado.
I just wanted to know about the occupations. What kind of, the mayor of Chinatown, what was his occupation? How did he make a living?
Oh, I think the mayor of Chinatown had business selling and buying, and there was also card games, and there was gambling, and the Chinese had restaurants. So whatever it took to make money, to educate the children, to make life better, that's what they did.
Are any of the restaurants still there?
The New China, owned by Francis Chin Wong and Herbert Wong, no longer there. The Lotus Room, which was from a different part of the family, also part of the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign War, is still in operation, but not by the family that originally opened it. So no,
A member of your family opened it originally?
uh,
Lotus
a
Room?
cousin. But New China was opened by my aunt and uncle, Francis and Herbert Wong.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is for this really wonderful background, wonderful story, and all that you've done.
Thank you for the opportunity. We have more work to do.
Yes, and we'll have, you
Yes.
know, more of the story from your family, but it's just wonderful that you brought the history to fore.
It's a
and that-
pleasure.
that you were able to make that presentation for the centennial of Colorado.
Yes.
There you go, full circle.
It's a pleasure.
We're very grateful to you, and we hope we can be in touch if we have additional.
I look
questions.
forward to it. We have a lot to say.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Do you
Thank
have any
you.
letters or other photographs?
Absolutely, yes, indeed we do.
Is there any letter from Chindan Su or anything that he wrote that is in the family?
I don't think so, but again, we'll have to defer to the earlier generation. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
I'll get some names from you. I want to look up your grandmother on Angel Island.
Oh,
If
I'd
that-
love it.
If that case is that long.
Yes.
There's a record.
And I missed who Francis's parent
Yeah, we
is.
have to have-
Francis is the child of who?
That was Willie Chin, that was his oldest daughter. So that was the mayor of Chinatown's oldest daughter, Frances, Frances, Frances.
And if you think of anything that the historians got wrong.
Oh,
let us
there's
know
a
so that
lot.
Not now, but maybe later we can talk about it, because I don't want to replicate, we don't want to replicate any of the errors that appeared in print.
Linda
If
knows.
we can have Linda talk
Yeah,
now, and
you
then
want to
after,
comment?
when Barry's done, we'll ask you questions. And
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
we'll ask you.
We're very
Yeah.
long-winded.
No.
As a people,
I don't know
that's a
how
little
much
bit of people
more.
looking. I'm sorry, is that a
Yeah,
word?
but, maybe you could describe.
It's from Stanford, it's a release, so we can use the
Oh,
video.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Something, well, I'd like to hear more about the occupation